Welcome to Power Hour. My name is Audrey Vernick, and I'm the Director of Patient and Family Advocacy for the Pediatric Epilepsy Surgery Alliance. We're really thrilled to have with us today for Power Hour our friend and mom and amazing person, Kristin Carleton. In addition to being a special needs mom herself, she really gets it. Actually, their whole team is all special needs moms, from what I understand. Kristin also spoke at our conference in Boston recently. She's also just happens to be a brilliant financial planner and has worked extensively in the financial services field. And today she's going to talk to us about what do we need to consider when we have a child with a disability in the role of the sibling as our child with a disability gets older. So I'll let you take it away, Kristin.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Kristin. I've worked in this industry for 20 years, but I came to special needs planning because when I was 19 weeks pregnant, I discovered that my son has agenesis of the corpus callosum. And when he was 2 weeks old, we were waiting to see the ophthalmologist to take a look at his optic nerve, and he had a seizure. And so he is diagnosed with epilepsy, in remission right now. And we're, taking one day at a time. He punched my nanny in the face yesterday. So kind of figuring out what to do with that. I am a financial planner. I am also an advocate. I participated in Partners in Policy Making through the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. I also completed the LEND program through VCU and am consistently looking for ways to give back. I serve on the board of Commonwealth Savers, which takes care of the Virginia Able Now program, and just really strive to be a voice for my kids, my family, and families just like ours. So that's what really drives me in my professional purpose as well, is how do I build a service that serves our families? And I will tell you, I'm really passionate about today's talk because my son is 5. My daughter is going to turn 8 in October, and she also has a disability, but she is has lower support needs. And she gets to a place of overwhelm very, very quickly, even though she does have lower support needs. And I just don't ever want her to be responsible for his care. Don't think that would be good for her life, or for him, that sibling dynamic. So we're going to really talk a lot today about the role of sibling and what role you want to have and how to carve that out, and discuss that as a family. This slide that you're going to look at, I just want you to think real briefly, like, where are you guys at in the process? How old is your sibling? How old are your parents? There's a lot of really big words on this slide. I'm not going to go into all of them. I don't expect you to know all of them, but this is really just to acknowledge that many of the milestones and stages that our families go through are different than traditional families. And so we think about things differently as we're doing the planning. So again, like, don't worry too much. If you don't know what this is, you're really not expected to know it. I don't want you to leave this presentation saying I'm an expert or I have no idea what Kristin was talking about. Just know that as we're doing planning, these are some of the things we're talking about. I also want you to feel really, really comfortable asking questions as we go. So feel free to do that at any point. I don't want you to feel like you're interrupting me. I actually really enjoy it when people are asking questions and interacting. If you look at this, as I talk about planning, I want your family in the center of all of the planning. And I say this especially to a sibling because I know that probably you've experienced where it feels like you're kind of pushed to the side. And maybe you're not getting a lot of the focus of intentional planning in your family. And in our planning, we want to look at every single member of the family and look at, are you cared for? Are you protected? And is there room for growth? And how does that look for each member of the family? How is it the same and how is it different? So let's talk about your role as a sibling. Okay, so the first one is really simple, right? You're just a sibling, you're a brother or a sister. Often siblings are friends, the best of friends. My kids love each other more than anything in the world, most of the time. But as you get older, sibling roles, especially sibling roles when you have a member with a special needs, can change. And you can also be a caregiver. You could also be asked to be a guardian or a trustee, a transportation provider, a micro board member, a care committee member, right? You could be a sounding board. You could be a supported decision maker. There's just so many different roles of a sibling, of a special needs family member or a member with a disability. And I think it's really important in families to be open about that discussion of what role you're comfortable with. And if something is expected, how you'll be supported in that role. Make sure that you have a full understanding of what it is, and how you can seek help from others. So in general, when we're thinking about care, and you're thinking about a sibling, when I talk about a care plan, I'm talking about the day-to-day of the person with a disability. But I want you to think through as a sibling, what are the things that you do daily, weekly, monthly to support your sibling? That if you were not around, someone else would need, or that you would want someone else to do that for them. And I encourage you to write it down, write it down in a journal or open a document on your computer and just take some notes on what it is you're providing, what you enjoy about it, maybe what you don't enjoy about some of it. But really have an awareness of what that looks like. How often do you talk to them? Are you driving them to certain appointments? What does that look like? And if they have government benefits, how are they receiving those? And do you have or need to have an understanding of how those work? And I'm going to really kind of gloss by the financial plan in full. But what I really want you to think about is, is there an understanding in your family of what financial responsibilities you might have and what those roles might be? I do want to mention an ABLE account. An ABLE account can be really, really important for a person with a disability. It works in conjunction with a special needs trust. It has tax benefits. There's also, if there's a 529 involved and you have a 529, so just taking a step back. An ABLE account is an account that is specifically for people with diagnosed disabilities and does not interfere with their government benefits eligibility. It is run by the states, and it is run by the state 529s. So 529 is a college savings account. ABLE is a disability savings account. They are different, but run by the same organizations. And they do differ state by state. There are 4 states that don't have ABLEs. So without going too much into this, if you've heard that you know that you have a 529 account for college and there is an ABLE or maybe not, just know that there can be transfer of funds from a 529 to an ABLE, and that can be really important, especially if a 529 was started, but now your sibling needs an ABLE. So know that that's out there. And there are a lot of great things about an ABLE account, but some of my favorites are that you can have checks or a debit card linked to them. Some states, the state of Washington actually has a prepaid card linked to the ABLE account that you can use for certain expenses. And you as a sibling, if you're over 18, could be the authorized representative for your sibling's ABLE account to help them know when and how to spend that money. This care, the financial plan, I mentioned it before, but like, what are you doing in terms of care? Thinking through those supports that they need, and are there supports that you're providing? What would it cost for somebody else to do those supports? Do you have an idea of how they'll be paid for later? Just thinking about that. A lot of this may be planning your parents are doing. And I just notice in our families, it's really helpful to have conversations, more transparent conversations earlier than later. When we talk about protecting your family, we are talking about life insurance. We're talking about tax benefits and minimizing taxes, and we're talking about legal. And what I want to really focus on today is the legal part of it, because that's where you might have a more active role and have some responsibilities that you'll want to understand. So when I talk about legal, the first thing is a special needs trust. If there is a special needs trust set up and it is intended that you will be a trustee at some point, having an understanding of what your role is as trustee, that really means that you are the person making the decisions around how money is spent for your sibling. And if they are eligible for government benefits, having an understanding of how to protect those benefits and keep them eligible. So if you are required to be a trustee, there are really a lot of ways that you can seek support. And one of those ways that you can seek support is by hiring either a co-trustee or a trust supporter. And a trust supporter would be somebody who they're not making the final decision, but they're providing you guidance, professional guidance on how to make sure that you're working within those guidelines so that you can be the person, hey, I know my sibling, I know what they need, I know what they want, but maybe I don't want to take on the responsibility of knowing all of those guidelines. I can pay somebody else to give me that advice. And I think that can be a really important role. You could also invite another family member who maybe has a background in this to be a co-trustee. So there's always the professional, there's a family member, there's a friend who could act with you. In this slide, you're going to see, and again, I don't want you to get too hung up on worrying about if there's a special needs trust set up or what legal your parents have set up, except to encourage you to start having those conversations. But I really want to focus on decision-making support and microboards. Decision-making support is having a really good understanding of the autonomy of the person with a disability, your sibling, and will they need lifelong support in decision making, and what type is in place today. So if they're over 18, do they need a power of attorney? Will they need a guardian? And who would that be? What would your role be in that? And do you want to have a role in helping them make important decisions in their life? So just really, again, having those conversations and having an understanding of what you'd like and what you're comfortable with and how you can do that is super important. And then a microboard is a very formal way of providing decision-making support where you can be on the microboard. You could even lead the microboard. Your parents could be on the microboard, other siblings or cousins or aunts and uncles can all serve on that microboard. Microboard is literally a board of directors working on behalf of an individual. And so you meet once a year, you have a board of directors, you have some bylaws that tell you how to act. And I know, again, this may seem like a lot and very complicated. The idea over time is that you get, as a sibling, a circle of support that's helping you support your sibling so that it's not all on you. right? If something comes up or something's going wrong, you can call the people on this microboard and say, hey, this is happening and I need some help. Can you help me figure this out? Let's have a meeting, or can you call this person? And they're already involved. They're already up to speed. There's a mechanism in place for all of that to happen. That's not just all on you. So it is a legally registered entity. And generally, we talked about that care plan before, that day-to-day support. So the board is aware of the care plan. They're trained on the care plan. They know what's going on in the day-to-day life. And, you can involve them in what's going on in your life and your limitations or your desires to be more involved or less involved, depending on what's going on with you. That board is also connected to the trustee if there is a trustee in place, a trust in place, where the micro board and the trustee and you are always conversing about what's happening and what's needed. So as we're talking about that decision-making support, these are just some examples of what decision-making support could look like. There is guardianship, which is, the person really needs help on day-to-day decision-making, especially in terms of medical decisions and financial decisions. Power of attorney and medical directive is less restrictive than guardianship. This is for a person who is able to appoint a power of attorney. And you could act as a power of attorney. You could act as a guardian if you're over 18, but you may not want to. And so just knowing if you're not doing it, but that's needed, who would be and what would your role be can be really helpful. We talked a lot about the micro board. Supported decision-making is another option. It's a less formal option than the micro board. It's a non-legal way to provide decision-making support to your loved one. And you can download those documents from many, many nonprofits. The ARC has those available on their website, where you're just putting in a team of people who have committed to providing decision-making support to that person. Just important to know those aren't recognized in most states as legal documents. So, and when we talk about growing, I really want to say, make sure that you as a sibling have your own goals, your own dreams, that you're pursuing them, and absolutely keep your sibling in mind, but also make sure that you're putting your life mask on, taking care of yourself, and setting your own goals. I know that can be hard in families like ours, and it is really important. And I say this, you may have heard the term person-centered plan. A person-centered plan is truly a plan that's all about you. And it's usually used for a person with a disability to say, hey, like there's all these other people that are making decisions for them and guiding their lives, but we want to make sure we know what their goals are, their desires are. And I put this under personal growth here. Every member of the family needs a person-centered plan, right? And it's you. Let's make sure that you're taken care of, that you're valued. When we talk about investing for families like ours, it is really important to know that you're thinking about investing and providing for people financially over multiple generations. And so we talk about, you may have heard about the sandwich generation, which is a person who's taking care of aging parents and then also taking care of their own kids. And if you're, as a sibling, balancing your own family, your parents and their care, your own kids, and then a sibling, it's more than a sandwich, right? It's 3 generations coming at you. And so having, again, that understanding of how other people's finances impact you and your family and what your caregiving responsibilities are, and having support set up can be really, really important as you get older. So just think about that. I won't talk too much about this, but in that multi-generational planning, investing can be a really, really important role there where it can take some of the risk off and provide income for the whole family. We are a team of moms. This is our team. Mary McDermott is who initially came. Her daughter has had brain surgery in order to control seizures. Dr. Kathy Matthews is our director of family services. She has a doctorate in human behavior and formerly was the head of the Faison Center for Autism here in Virginia. So she helps families navigate all these different services, advocacy needs, sibling relationships, family dynamics, and training people so that they have the education and resources that they need to be successful and integrated into the community and living their own wonderful lives. So I would invite you to engage with us. There's a lot of different ways. We're all on social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We have a private Facebook community. It's all needs community. I'd love to have you in there. We share a lot of information over time, just about lives but also different aspects of special needs planning. Audrey is in that group. She's a phenomenal resource. There's just a bunch of people talking about what's worked for them. We do offer a class, a special needs master class. It is fully free. So feel free to get on there or download a report. Our website has a lot of different information that you can download directly from there. And another resource is every Friday. It actually says every other Friday, but we are doing it every Friday right now. We're doing office hours and it's from 12 to 1, completely free. Just come in, ask questions. Again, we are a team of moms and we want everyone to have help with special needs planning. And we recognize that people are coming from all different resource levels. So there are a lot of different ways that you can get information and education from us that don't cost money. I wanted to keep this kind of short and simple. I know it's not a simple topic, but I'm here and open for questions, concerns, comments, anything you'd like to add.
Thank you so much for that overview. It's super helpful. I don't see any questions in the chat yet. If anyone wants to put a question in the chat or just unmute. I guess, I'd like to ask you just a couple questions. I'm going through this process myself with my son. I have an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old. And I will say that, so the 20-year-old has had a hemispherectomy, had half his brain removed to stop epilepsy. And I worry about the younger son having to be responsible for my older son. And so one of the things that I think a lot about is how can I relieve that burden for him when he's older. So I'm trying to set things up in such a way that he won't be trying to figure this all out on his own. I'm probably not going to die tomorrow. Hopefully it'll be another 20, 30 years, right? Who knows? 40 years if things, they have life extenders in the future. But
yeah.
So is there anything like your top 3 things, if you're the parent of a child who has a sibling that will probably ultimately be responsible for, that would help the sibling land in a safe, in a knowledgeable and kind of, secure way? Like, what are the 3 things that you would recommend that families do first, I guess?
So the number one is when you start developing a plan, involve both of the siblings in the planning to take into account the sibling dynamic, but also the sibling who doesn't have the disability, what do they want? I have found in some families where the parents are dancing so far away from saying, I don't want my son or daughter to have any responsibility. And the son and daughter are actually saying, but I want to help. Like, I want to be there. This is really important to me. This is my family. And, I see this as one of my core values. So knowing that, I think is really important.
That's a really important point. I don't think I'm doing that very well.
it's hard too,
Mhm.
because you we have our own dreams and goals for our kids, that we want to see them
Yeah.
enact.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say from that standpoint, really knowing what they want and knowing that that could change over time as
Hmm.
well, and being flexible to that. And then making sure that they have access to education around what their role would be, and how, like, what could go right and what could go wrong.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, I have seen siblings who act as trustee and guardian who have a really beautiful relationship with their sibling, and it's absolutely the right move and the right role.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah.
Um,
I think the other thing with that I hear sometimes is that the parents get older and the parents die and nothing has been set up to make that sibling the trustee or guardian or financially on the financial paperwork or whatnot. And that creates a set of problems as well. And I think it's really hard for us with very medically complex children with all we've been through to also be thinking 20, 30 years down the road, right? When we may die, but leaving, I know how complex all of this is for me to manage. And then for me to leave it for my younger son without a roadmap of how to do this. I can't do that personally. I just don't want to do that. And I have had some situations where we've helped some families and connected them to, I think to Mary, actually your colleague, because they were in a situation that wasn't good. And
mhm.
so that can be really scary too. So I think some of it is like preventing the worst. But yeah. So we do have a question in the chat that I want to add or ask you, sorry. At what age do you start talking about this with the sibling, a super serious kid, and you don't want to stress them out, etc.? And so is there an age where you start to talk about the role that the sibling might take in adulthood or how they care for their sibling or like, I'm talking even younger kids, like at what age do you start to have this conversation? What would you recommend?
So it's a great question. And I certainly don't want anybody to be having a conversation like that if it would impact the sibling's mental health.
Mhm.
And I think that's also a really important thing to keep in mind is, hey, if a conversation about this is going to be too difficult and overwhelming for siblings' mental health, that should be a really good indicator of needing more support
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
them in adulthood, and really thinking through, like, maybe guardian or trustee is not the right role for them.
Mhm.
Maybe a care committee member or a micro board member is
Mhm.
a supporter,
Yeah.
is a better role.
Yeah.
So, and you as a parent really know that the best, right?
Mhm.
The other part of that is occasionally you get a really mature kid, right, who's like, hey, I'm 15 or 16 and like I want to start talking about this, but that's really rare, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I generally would say wait until 18, where they actually could fulfill the role anyways.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and then again, like, chart to follow your child's need. Like, I
Mm.
would not start a conversation with an 18-year-old and be like, hey, by the way, you're going to be a trustee, and here's the amount of money that's going to go in that trust. And you should be ready to take that on tomorrow.
Yeah.
But maybe starting to have a conversation of like, hey, we know that you and let's say sibling's name is Amy, and I don't know. I'm tired of talking about siblings. Let's say it's Kara and Amy.
Yeah.
Hey, Kara, we know that you and Amy are really, really close. We get the feeling that you'd like to be involved in supporting her if we're no longer here. What are your thoughts on that? You can start it as simple and general as that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be about money or like, hey, are you going to stay in the state of Virginia?
Mhm.
But that is a time where it starts to be important, right? I've had siblings come to me and say, well, I can't go away to college. Like, I want to go out of state, but my sibling is here and I feel like I can't do it. And
Interesting.
if you're seeing that or that decision making or hearing it or suspect it, that's the time to start having a
Mm-hmm.
conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I will say personally that, so we created our, so I'm going to say 2 points actually. First, I'll just say we created our older son's special needs trust when he was about 5, but it turned out to have been the wrong kind of trust. So that's one thing I just want to give a caution for. And we didn't know that at the time because, so that's the other problem with this is it's like expensive, but then how do you find the right person, right?
Yeah.
So we ended up having to redo it when my son the older one was turning 18. And so the other one's about 2 years younger. So I want to say my younger son was about 15. And we started, as we were redoing the special needs trust, which would be a springing trust, which is not what we had set up before. So it was wrong. Meaning that when we die, all of our assets and life insurance and everything would go into that trust. And then would be divided between the two boys, and one of them would get the special needs trust, the other would get a smaller percentage is how we ended up doing it.
Hmm.
But at the time we were able to have a conversation with our younger son because he was one of those kids, but we were also very careful to not say, we expect you to do this. What we said was, we expect you to have some role in your brother's life, and you will get to choose what role you want to have. And that can change over time. And our attorney required us to have a trust advisory committee. So I think you talk about the micro board. I've heard you speak about that before. It's similar and different from a trust advisory committee. I understand the micro board has more protections because it's run more like a nonprofit. But for the trust advisory committee, and we told our younger son, there's 6 people on that committee with you. You get to decide, like, everyone will get to choose their roles and kind of as things evolve. And then also my older son is going to be part of this too. It's his special needs trust. And what does he want? And that it's really going to be more about like keeping your brother, making sure that his needs are met, but it's not all your responsibility. So I think that's the other thing. Sometimes with siblings, we feel like, how am I going to dump this all on them? And you don't really have to dump it all on them. You can say, like you said, the first thing you said when I asked what's the number one thing is get the sibling involved. Like, what do you want your role to be? And when I was creating our trust advisory committee, I reached out to some close friends, family friends, and one of them said to me, I don't want to be on the trust advisory committee, but I do want to be known as his special friend and his auntie. And I want to be part of his life, but I don't want that role. I want another role. And I think really honoring that is really important. And then the other thing I wanted to mention and the question just came up in the chat, which is timing is perfect. So I'm going to say what I was going to say first, and then I'll read the question and then you can answer. So I think that some of our kids have a childhood condition that might be very severe that involves a massive brain surgery or not. They have a childhood condition. And as parents, we don't know what are they going to need in adulthood. So should I be investing all this time and money into something that maybe they're not going to need? I think the lifetime impact of epilepsy is understated. And I think that we want, as parents, want to feel like, oh, my kid's going to be different. My kid's going to be okay. I think setting things up and not needing them is better than needing them and not having them.
Yeah.
And I think that evolves as the child gets older. Like when we redid our son's trust at close to 18, it was because we recognized he really is going to need this, and he's going to need all of these supports in place on the ABLE account and everything that we could get for him, because by then we had a better sense of what his adult person would be like. And while he's incredibly quote unquote high functioning, he still has a lot of support needs. So I think that it's a hard question for us as parents to be like, I don't want to assume that my child's not capable of something. So the question is possibly a bit of peripheral conversation, but when should we consider having an ABLE and special needs trust set up? And how do we know if we need one? My 10-year-old had a left TPO, and we're hopeful he'll be independent. And then the 2 errors would be setting it up when he doesn't need one and also not setting up when he does, the more grave of the 2 errors being the latter. And so I'm going to let you answer, but I have some thoughts as well in case, but you go for it.
Okay, so the first part of this is when you're uncertain of how much support they're going to need, both from people, from government benefits eligibility, all of those things. So I would set up a very flexible plan And one thing I would say that is in your control is you can either create the trust, but then write language into your wills that says, hey, the executor of this will or the trustee of my family trust, you are going to meet with these people and decide if this special needs trust needs to be funded.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can write language in to create what's called a springing trust that says, hey, like it's not created now, but if you all meet and you determine that it's needed, you're creating a special needs trust on their behalf.
Yeah.
And that is a great lever to have because it gives you that flexibility that you're wanting. It's not creating something unnecessarily or funding something unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Boxing someone in that doesn't need to be boxed or protected.
Yeah. We actually have language in our, we have a memo of intent that is referenced in our special needs trust. And it says, the memo of intent says that the trust advisory committee can dissolve the trust and just give the money to my older child if it's at some point it's felt the trust is not needed. And that's a team decision on the trust advisory committee, including my older son, right? So if there's a point where they're like, he doesn't need this anymore, he's managing his own finances, he's got his own health insurance, he's able to maintain a job, he's able to maintain and afford housing, then, and pay for all its own expenses and travel and medical and navigate all of that, which is quite a lot, I will say, in adulthood, but that he could, that's an option. So the trust could spring when we die. Let's say we go fly somewhere and get killed in a plane, which my husband always says, this is the craziest thing to think about, but this is what special needs moms think about. And the trust advisory committee could meet and say, actually, he doesn't need this. He's fine. Right. So I think and it is costly to set up. So there is that factor. But again, in our son's case, we do feel it's needed. Do you have a thought about the ABLE account?
So I would say in almost all cases, just set up the ABLE. All you need for the ABLE is that you are diagnosed with a disability. And the money accumulates without you paying taxes. And as long as you take it out in a qualified disability expense, there's no tax paid.
Yeah.
No penalty. And so why not set it up? If you're worried about if you're in a state where there's a Medicaid payback, then keep a lower balance. But you always want to keep that ABLE account below 100,000 anyways.
Yeah. I don't know if people know that if you have a college fund, a 529 plan, you can roll that into an ABLE account. Do you know if you can go the other way? Can you roll an ABLE account into a 529?
You cannot.
Yeah.
But you can use an ABLE account for
College.
education.
Yeah. 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 I to answer this question to the parent that asked that, I regretted not setting up the ABLE account sooner because we did it pretty close to my disabled son's 18th birthday. And then we applied for SSI and he was denied, which is very common. And it took a year and a half to get reimbursed. And we had set up a rental agreement. This is a whole separate topic about in-kind support and maintenance with Social Security. But regardless, in order for them to reimburse us the full amount, we had to prove that he would have been able to pay us back all of the rent that we had in the agreement. And we didn't have enough money in the ABLE account to prove that. So we were only able to go back a certain amount of time to get his retroactive benefit in Social Security, which was about a year and a half. So we ended up getting only about we got about half of what we should have gotten for him. So if I'd had more money in the ABLE account for him, we would have gotten the full reimbursement. There's all these weird rules when you start getting into the weeds with this, but, and again, there's not really a depth, but you can use the qualified ABLE expenses. My understanding is it's pretty much anything, like it's improving quality of life. So you could even take a trip. Like if I've heard different presentations on ABLE. Do you agree with that it can be used? It's pretty broad on what it can be used for, right? Yeah.
You can use it to pay mortgage, for down payment of a house, for closing costs,
to buy a car.
Yeah.
School expenses, work expenses, travel, pretty much anything. I don't really think there's any, maybe things that are illegal you can pay for through the ABLE account, but yeah, that's my understanding as well. So yeah.
I did
Um,
see a question about,
Oh yeah, let me read that one too, just so that the audience can hear it. Sorry, I skipped that one. We have thought a lot about this and discussed with both of our daughters. A positive dilemma we have is that the disabled sibling is actually fine with handling money and her affairs, may be better than the non-disabled sibling, but both are doing well. What happens if the disabled sibling has a setback and needs more help from her sister in the future? That is a great question.
yes. So this is frankly the toughest situation, right? Is how do you prepare for an unknown where things get worse? Um, Especially because the disabled sibling is doing really, really well. You want to empower them, you want them to live the most full life with the most agency, that that anyone else would have. But you also want to be prepared for the what if things turn around. And the best that I can say is, keep the conversation going with both siblings about that, and have a framework. I still would say that you might want to have something in your legal documents that says, hey, if the disabled sibling has, their condition has taken a setback, that there is that springing trust available,
Mhm.
that there could be some more supports put in place. Um, if you're alive and that's happening, then you'll know. If you're not, and this is between the two siblings, then it becomes the disabled sibling having some proactive legal planning in place for herself,
Mhm.
that then maybe she's building her own community of support, her own micro board or care committee, that can help her through those decisions. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I also think just in terms of decision making, you could set up like a healthcare proxy or an advanced healthcare directive that names the sibling. So you can put the parents and the sibling on a power of attorney, advanced healthcare directive. Our son is conserved, so he's attended college, but he still has a conservatorship because he is so medically complex. And we just didn't feel like he was able to really advocate on behalf of his own medical decision making. And in California, if you don't have guardianship, you don't get to go into the hospital with the patient once they're an adult. So when I think my son has a shunt, he's got a lot of issues. So we felt that was really important. But I think that you could name the sibling and the parents on a healthcare proxy or advanced healthcare directive that would be in the event of incapacitation of decision making. But then what is that? Who determines that? Because there was a situation in the UK recently where a young adult was shunted in childhood, showed up at the ER with mental status changes and ended up being put in a mental institution instead of the shunt being addressed. And so for me, I'm sort of like, my colleague Monica is an attorney. So both of us are always like the doom, like worst possible scenario. Okay, let's prevent against that. But so I think that's another question too, there's the financial protections, but then also the decision-making protections, and how do you set that up without taking away the autonomy or the decision-making ability or the financial independence of the individual with a disability, right? We want to empower them as much as possible. So for my son, while he has a conservatorship, and we have all these things set up for him, I always say we treat him like we're in a supported decision making agreement where he's part of every decision that's made. We're not making any arbitrary decisions on his behalf, and we've promised him we won't until it's needed. Only if it's needed, and until then we're collaborating in decision making. But it's really hard. It's really hard when, our kids, my son is sort of borderline, but when your kid is higher functioning and you're feeling like, I don't know if I can do this, I think it's almost harder in a way than having a child that is more impaired, where you're like, clearly this needs to happen and everybody's on board. I think it can be a very difficult place to be. So,
I totally agree. I do also want to just remind people, because somebody said this to me yesterday, and I was like, oh yeah, you make a really good point. There's a lot of conversation about power of attorney and whether that's appropriate. My husband and my sister have power of attorney over me.
me too.
So,
Yep.
yeah. So that is something that I have gone out and said, hey, I want there to be a lever that can be pulled if I need support and help.
Yeah.
And I don't need it today, but I do want to be prepared. And so there's nothing like inherently wrong with people saying, I'm going to need this help.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really important point as well. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anyone have any final thoughts? This was really helpful. I think, I'll just say that to the families that are watching this is such a complex topic. I really appreciate, Kristin, your Facebook group, your office hours. I've signed up for your course. I haven't done it yet, to be perfectly honest, but these are really incredible resources. I put them all in the chat. I'll put them in the chat again. We're really, really grateful. And do you want to talk about, you said you had like a slide about special offer. What have you got that parents can access?
So if you did book a strategy call with us today, the strategy call, we actually offer 2 complimentary. And if you did book that, we would provide you with a framework to start your special needs master plan and an hour of advocacy with Dr. Kathy Matthews. And that advocacy is where she could really start helping you to see, like, where might your area of need be in advocacy? Where should you focus? Is it in the school with IEP? Is it with Medicaid? Sometimes there's just some tips, like we can just point you in the right direction and get you going, and that's all you need. So just know that that's available.
And is that free, or is there a fee for that?
It's free.
That's amazing. And you serve all over the United States, right? Okay, that's great. Wonderful. That's it. So the parents that ask the questions that we just discussed might benefit from this, to like have kind of a deeper dive and like, what is it that we should be thinking about? Maybe even including the child with a disability and the sibling, if they're adults, in that conversation. I think for the parent who asked, who has a younger child, I agree, waiting till 16, 18 is probably more appropriate, but this seems like a really great offer. And I know I need to do it because we've talked about it. I just have been so busy with the conference, but yeah. So yeah, that's really a wonderful offer. Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is the QR code for that.
Okay, great.
And the meeting would be with Mary McDermott, my business partner, who's awesome.
Yeah. And there's 2 webinars on our YouTube channel that she's done for our community too. So if parents are wondering about, well, I don't know if I'm going to like Mary as much as I like Kristin, watch the webinars and you'll find out that you do, because she's also lovely. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm just